Hi, welcome. On this video, I'm going to provide kind of a crash course, okay? In terms of what when I talk about the shell game. I talk about this whole, off leash, loose leash picture, okay, that many trainers out there are trying to present, okay, as a real picture of change. As I go through again, I'm going through the whole Kevin Murdoch, again, his live streams and talking about trying to paint a certain picture. Well, I talk about, okay, a real picture versus a counterfeit. And I talk about why the process itself matters. Okay, the method matters. The issue about at the social level, okay, the issue about influence and control being reconciled in such a way that's going to change perceptions of dogs the right way in terms of diminishment of unwanted behavioral issues, in terms of taking the stress off the dog, in terms of dealing with, say, sometimes out there, the reactivity issue, all of it, in terms of the level of engagement once a relationship problem is already underway. And here's the thing, if a relationship problem isn't underway, okay, if the perceptions are aligned the right way, then this process, okay, itself doesn't need to be part of the equation, okay? And this is where, again, I talk about my first police dog, Reuben. Okay, Reuben is extremely high drive dog. I talk about this entire system of training, okay, is based on the relationship I had with my first police dog and achieving, okay, a extremely high level. And I talk about, here's the thing, I talk about my experience, but not in terms of trying to quarterback, okay, this system a certain way, because understand that it comes down to you, okay? You're the one that has to change. Okay. It is about the person. Okay. The person plays a tremendous role. Okay. In this process. So, I talk about again, but my background, okay, it's opportunity. Okay. It's the ability to move to a certain level of insight. Okay. But it's an opportunity. It can be a blown opportunity. Okay. For those who are aligned to this ideology. Okay. So again, I talk about, my background. Again, I've had, again, 12 years, canine handler trainer experience, okay, with two police dogs over the course of those years. And again, Ruben and myself holding the record of the youngest police dog in Canada to make a drug find, okay. That's document. Okay, you can go on my website. I have the articles are all there, newspaper articles. It's all laid out. My experience, my background, awards. Okay, accommodations, tip of the spear. Not just for again, started our department's first canine unit and expanded that. Okay, into other agencies, federal prisons. Okay, I was on the go. Okay, for years. I had back then a pager. I was on call 24/7, 12 years. So I've been there. Okay, and the thing is, a lot of these. Understand when you hear these trainings going on, a lot of them aren't even out of the starting gate. Okay, when I say that, it's not meant to be a cheap shot. It's the reality. Okay, they don't even have the background or experience to even go there in terms of insight, in terms of what I'm talking about. And so what they're doing is they're playing off appearances, they're playing off certain relationship dynamics, and they're exploiting everything. Okay, they're going through all these narratives you hear. So I go through this, I break this down. So again, I'm going to provide a crash course here before I get into. Okay, so I'll go into the whole Murdoch live stream they put out, trying to say, well, here you go, here's another live stream. This proves that things are solid, that blah blah, and then put the leash to the test. Well, no, it's not the right way at all. Okay, so when I talk about right here, and just a kind of a little bit of a plug here. Okay, the things I'm going to be getting into here, kind of more briefly. Okay, this goes into this system. Okay, so I talk about my courses. Okay, and even if you want to be a trainer of this system. Okay, I go in depth into all this stuff. There's a formula. Okay, you can go through be able to be confident in being able to see through all of it. Okay, be able to, see beyond appearances, be able to actually achieve that result with a real picture of change. Okay, understand how all these dynamics play out. For those who want to go, go in that direction, go to that level. And so it's a great opportunity. So all these trainers, understand all these trainers, these cheap shots are going on. It's all to me background noise. Okay, they can't touch the information I put out because this is what happens is I try to attack the person, right, versus the information. They can't attack the information. The information is solid. You can put everything I say to the test. And this is the game that they play. And this is a shell game they're playing here in terms of they're trying to exploit, okay, certain relationship dynamics. But again, these are things to be aware of. So again, understand that when I talk about the starting point engagement, once a relationship problem is underway, it matters. Okay. So, when I enter into a relationship problem, okay, how the leash is used, how the core ingredients are reconciled through a intentional interaction based method, okay, that speaks the right language, that lines up certain themes such as dog understanding intent, okay, being able to reconcile the responses, reactions of dogs to the relationship. See, these are things that a lot of these trainers they can't do. And so this is why they label things as abuse, and you hear them choking dogs, and they use all the same stuff because they can't work through stuff. They're not able to reconcile. If you can reconcile it, okay, you're able to work through it. Okay, and there's certain accommodation even through certain things. When you deal with dogs that have a high level of stress load going on, aggressive. If you watch my videos, you'll see how I am doing things in a more intentional way, okay, to work through it because there's a working through. Okay, but these trainers, they just lose their minds because understand they're surface, okay, they're focused on appearances and they're exploiting certain dynamics. So understand when I talk about why the dog training world is the way that it is, with all these problems, well, it's inherent to that. It's symptomatic. Okay, understand that that's just the way it's a package deal. It seems normal. Okay, to come out the other side with a bad picture change, blaming dogs, see all the problems and all the controversies. I go through them all. So understand the starting point, it matters. So I'm walking in within less than 5 minutes. Okay, I'm bringing those core ingredients together. Okay, they're reconciled through Murdaugh's method. That's not what's happening here. People understand. So you always have to understand that that's not what they're doing. Okay, so you get a problem. That's the biggest problem right there. Okay, they're not reconciling. So anything that they're showing after that, okay, I would not trust any of it. Okay, in fact, we'll talk about this. The clues that are there, that in fact you shouldn't trust it. Okay, so again, the core ingredients are reconciled, and there's a way to test. Okay, again, with everything lining up the way I describe it, intent. If you watch the Murdaugh video, again, understand that my goal here is that trainers like Murdaugh will reject everything I have to say. That there's trainers out there or individuals out there that can look at the videos because this is information focused, right? This information I put out there are going to benefit from it. To say, I get it, I see it, I understand it, I want to go further. All right. That's the goal here. So if you watch his, when he actually, because he had a whole year to do the test, okay, didn't do it. Right. Why is that? I mean, he could have done it. He did it in that video and it blew everything out of the water. It put everything in a position that everything that I already knew because the clues were all there. Okay. Mark DeBose watched his live streams and he's the one that picked out all the clues to say, oh, the dog's walking, the reactivity's something's happening in the background, he's turning going the other way. Not saying any of it. Say, well, I'm turning because of this, and then we're picking up gray goose and carrying them and moving them out of situations. So all the clues. Then how you want to look at the clues? Understand? Just like go back to the parent example. And again, it's very helpful. If you're dealing with a selfish child, okay, the clues are going to be there that that's what you're dealing with. You're going to see your 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 child's not going to get along with their peers. They're very selfish. So all the selfishness is going to be kind of appearing, right? Even independent of outside the parameters of think about what I'm saying here. The interplay, certain interplays with parental influence happen a certain way that's really going to reveal. So this is where you line it up with the test I'm talking about. Well, influence and control are reconciled. It blows everything out of the water because I say it's a trap. Okay, there's no way out. Okay, just like when a parent, and think about what I'm saying here, when a parent, okay, has an interaction with a selfish child to pick up, say, the example I use is clean up your room or pick up your toys, right? Parental influence, it's an express intentional demand. It's reasonable, so intent, and the child understands intent, right? And if the child's attitude's already bad, if the relationship problem's already underway, what is revealed in that? right? Unless that conversation gets sidelined midway, and think about what I'm saying, because I mentioned this in some other videos where the the parent changes it up. Well, that's not going to reveal the way it needs to, right? It's got to the integrity of that conversation. That's why I talk about the integrity of the core ingredients being reconciled at the beginning. That's a big deal, okay, for things to align properly. Okay, because this is where you even get into this whole fire and gasoline triggering thing when you see aggressive dogs and then the rubbing and the petting and there's an explosion, right? The dog goes into a moment of aggression. Like clarity is another big thing. Clarity is it matters. Clarity through that conversation, not verbal conversation, the interactions that the dog understands intent that aligns in terms of aligns the perceptions of the dog. Dog comes into agreement with understanding intent. Okay. So, but again, just like the conversation with the parent, right? It's exposed, right? Because, it's that touching knees type of conversation versus, and there's the problem with the core ingredients not being reconciled, right? Or bringing them into an off leash level is like standing 20 feet away having a conversation. Okay. Parental influence is kind of in there. We'll talk about this whole thing with this shell game issue. It's in there, but is it going to do what it needs to do based on it not being reconciled? Absolutely not. Okay. In Murdaugh's case, okay. And when we watch the video, the live stream, you'll see him. What's his objection? Keeps going on like a lunatic about how offended he is over the leash. Well, I hear someone talk like that, then they aren't going to go there in the first place. Those core greens aren't going to be reconciled the right because they're so offended, right? They're barely bringing them in, or they're so it's not like so. Dogs know the real deal. Okay, your role is critical. So if you're not willing to engage, guess what? You're going to be left stranded with a counterfeit picture. But we'll talk about the certain interplays here in that live stream in terms of what is happening, okay? The back and forth of it all. So here we talk about again, I talk about that's what the element of change, the test, right? That's what again brings it to the being able to see. So when I go in a situation, it's for the benefit of the dog owners because I line up. The dog will have a certain reaction, perhaps go into level of challenge, and then I go into questions. Well, do you think the dog doesn't understand intent? And I have very interesting moments happen too. When they let the dog lay down, free will. Talk about free will and choice. Lay down the leash, right? And then when I start to line up differently, say, okay, now start to let's get the roles reconciled properly, and then start to express control. And that dog will absolutely refuse. Then it's like, do you think the dog doesn't understand? What we go through? No, I go through because it's about who's in control. Okay, I understand. Very interesting. We go through this stuff, so it's about we get into free will and choice. Those that's a problem as well because these trainers they can't sort that out because they're in the middle of a relationship problem and they're tying this into learning theory and using motivators such as food and other motivating agents, even the relationship itself based on what you've already signed a contract over time. So through certain expectations, certain associations, you can have responses happen and they're not worth anything. Okay. They don't represent at all the perception of changing. You think that they are and they're not. Okay. This is where this gets into this level of really breaking the stuff down to know everything's got to come to a hard stop. You have to clean slate. You got to start fresh, right? This matters. So when you start tying into certain motive and then you start to look at responses in a superficial way, you're going to be caught in that trap of thinking that change is happening. It's really not. So here, again, not reconciled versus okay. That's this again. It's about the starting point. Okay, counterfeit off leash clues. I talked about that. There's going to be clues. Just like there's clues with the selfish child, the child's selfish. Okay. You gather those clues up and then you say, okay, I need to engage, right? So, false image again, we talk about the themes I talk about that these trainers will bring in because once a relationship problem's underway and you start to use certain motivating agents, even the relationship itself becomes a problem that way. Then you bring in the issue of bribery, accommodation, and negotiation. You hear these trainers try to talk to the dog, like, please come to me. Like, they know that they're in a mess. And this goes into certain even concepts, okay, such as counter conditioning, trying to change, right, the emotional state of the dog. Well, control itself, okay, so how these trainers, how they build bridges that way, it's a problem because what happens is the dog is still in control control will offer up a false image of change. And then you get a real problem because you're not actually changing anything. Okay. Those themes I talked about, those are the themes that are in play now because you didn't engage the relationship problem the right way. You didn't follow path of an intervention. You didn't bring those core ingredients and reconcile those in at the social level. And now you're trying to play off of certain concepts and certain themes. And yes, the context of agreeableness. Okay, so a dog can be agreeable, just like a selfish child be agreeable to say get along with their peers in a certain moment. If you hold out the issue about, well, if you get along with them, we'll go for an ice cream cone after. Oh, sure, I'm going to get along. It doesn't mean you're changing anything. See, it's about understanding. This is why, again, you always take it back to the test. Okay, once you get focused the right way, you'll start to see how these things break down or come together. But again, take into account, and there's certain things you have to take into account. The level, I talk about the social need of the dog. Okay, talk about the drive of the dog. So that again, I'll blow this out of the water even quicker. Okay, that's kind of your opportunity to do what? To actually step back and ask questions you should be asking as to what's going on here. Is it really the dog's fault? Why can't I get through this? Why can't I overcome these issues? Well, this is why. Okay, because you're taking it in a different direction, and now you're dealing with a false picture, and you think it's a real picture of change, and you're blindsided. And that's how bad things happen. So, but again, social need of the dog. So some dogs have a lower level of social need, and depending on the person and influence and control come into the relationship regardless, okay, through how you're interacting at all levels, at all points during the day and throughout the relationship. So certain things can factor into for change to happen. But here's the deception. But then if you're a trainer and you're playing off of certain, ideologies, the people that are coming to you for help, you could have a 30, 40% fail rate and you won't even know it because you're not focused the right way. Okay, you're not looking at these, you're not understanding these dynamics of how they're playing into perceptions changing. But even to get into that type of conversation, right, with these trainers, like forget it, okay, because they'll be so lost in what I'm saying. I talk about why this really can take people's legs out, okay, but because again, when I talk about, you say, a board and training washing out on somebody through these trainers and why it's such a problem for some people, not others. Like why do some fail and others not? Some succeed and some fail within the same systems. I talk about the reason why, right? Because this is all part of it. What that means, that person, you transfer that over based on what needs to be generated in their relationship with those core ingredients. They're not going to come, they have to come together. That ain't going to happen. They adopt people's methodologies because their system is set up so it's not about that. But they themselves are going to have personal success, right? Based on them as a person, influence and control coming in, right? So we get into this. That's why we get into these play-based systems and stuff. I get into all of that and tell you where the problems are. Okay, but you're going to see blame shifting within all of them at a certain level. You're just going. That's the reality. Okay, so all to say that again, this is kind of a crash course. I get into all these at a really, deep level on the dog trainer certification program. So if this interests you, if you're like, wow, okay, kind of just gives you a snapshot. But here's the thing: you go into my courses. I had this happen. A couple of people went in the courses, and as trainers, they wouldn't let it go and got highly offended. They're over there in Murdoch going on. Well, that's not a true test of anything. Okay, that's I tell people you got to let it go. This is the reality of what training is. Okay. This is not, it takes a path of an intervention. There's a lot here to get your head around. But if you're trying to keep one foot over here in this ideology and the foot, it ain't going to work. So the information I put out, it's either going to, again, it offers hope. It's going to, in terms of your journey, take you into at a deeper level with dogs. It's going to be, it's going to be great. But for going into it as an already established trainer, holding on these ideas and just selling this, well, you're going to be highly offended. Okay, two things are going to happen. You're either going to be offended or it's going to be like life changing. Okay. And I'm not just saying that. That's the reality. It's going to be life changing for your dogs, for you, but you have to let it go. So again, I wanted to do this first before I got into the live stream. Okay. So As I go through a couple parts of that live stream put out by Murdoch, I'll be touching on these, but just go back through and rewatch this. Okay, as I talk through it, I want to try to, because again, it will seem kind of confusing as I go through and I talk about certain things, this whole back and forth, but understand it is so much about appearances. You have to default back to what actually generates a real picture of change. Thanks for watching.